The red flags went into Ezra Vale's wheat field before the coffin dirt had settled. Clara saw them from the cemetery road. 3 men in dark coats were walking the east quarter with a brass survey wheel, pressing little red cloth markers into the ground every 30 paces. Not one of them looked toward the graveyard. Not one of them took off his hat. Ezra had been buried less than an hour, and already the bank was marking his farm like meat on a butcher's block. Clara Vale stood beside the wagon in the only black dress she owned. 43 years old, hands raw from nursing her husband through the last fever, boots still muddy from the grave. And across the road, a stranger with polished shoes wrote numbers in a ledger, as if sorrow were just another column. Ezra had taken 6 weeks to die. The fever came soft at first, like an ordinary chill. Then it settled in his lungs, and by the end, Clara was sleeping in a chair beside him, counting each breath, because she was afraid there might not be another. On the final morning, he opened his eyes with a kind of strange peace. He pressed her fingers once, said, "Keep the place warm, Clara." And then he was gone. The doctor called it merciful. Clara tried to believe him. But mercy did not stop a banknote, and mercy did not turn 3 strangers away from a dead man's wheat. The farm sat outside Red Willow Crossing in the Platte country of Nebraska territory, where the wind could strip a roof in March and the summer grass shone silver before sunrise. 128 acres, a creek in the low draw, a hay barn Ezra had raised by hand, 2 milk cows, 26 acres of winter wheat, and a house Ezra had built too large because he and Clara had once spoken, softly and foolishly, about 6 children at supper. No children ever came, so the west room stayed shut, the little loft stayed empty, and Clara learned to stop looking at the cradle Ezra had made from cottonwood. Now the bank had come for all of it. A man crossed from the field while the last mourners were still climbing into their wagons. He was tall, neat, clean-shaven, and careful with his gloves. "Mrs. Vale," he said. "Bryce Holcomb, Platte Valley Trust." He did not offer his hand. "I will make this brief. Your husband borrowed against this place $1,460, due the 15th of October. Clara looked past him at the red flags trembling in the wheat. "That is 6 weeks," she said. "It is 5 weeks and 2 days. Holcomb's mouth barely moved. "The trust is prepared to take the property now, clear the note, and leave you $75 in cash. That is more kindness than business usually allows." Clara turned back to him. $75 for my husband's life. "No, ma'am. $75 for land you cannot keep." There it was, the sentence he had ridden out to deliver. A widow could not keep a farm. A widow could not cut hay, plant wheat, mend fence, haul water, winter cattle, pay taxes, fight frost, fight debt, and stand upright through all of it. On one point, Bryce Holcomb was right. Clara could not do it alone. But he had mistaken that for surrender. That night she sat at the kitchen table with Ezra's ledger open and a lamp burning low. The house made all the small sounds it had made for 20 years. A rafter knocking, the stove settling, wind working its fingers under the door. But without Ezra's breathing in the next room, every sound felt too large. Clara counted what was left. $9.60 in a blue sugar tin, 1 sack of flour, a garden near ready for harvest, 2 cows she could not sell unless she wanted winter without milk, no grown sons, no hired man, No brother close enough to help. No time. Then her eyes moved to the west room, the closed door, the 2 beds inside. The shelves Ezra had built too low because he imagined small hands reaching them. And a memory came back so hard it almost hurt. 2 winters before, a freight wagon had overturned in a blizzard 12 miles north of town. The parents died before morning. 3 children lived. Clara remembered them sitting on a bench outside the county clerk's office, wrapped in coats that did not fit, while grown people walked around them with their voices lowered. Nobody had room, nobody had money, nobody wanted the trouble. So the children were sent east to an institution people called a home because it sounded less cruel than warehouse. The county was full of children like that. Left by fever, left by fire, left by river crossings, failed claims, bad harvests, and men who rode away. Everybody knew. Everybody pitied them. Then everybody looked back at their own stove and thanked God it was not their grief to carry. Clara stared at the west room door, then at Ezra's ledger, then at the empty chairs, and she heard his last words again. Keep the place warm. By sunrise, she had saddled the mule. The county clerk, Mr. Danton, was eating a cold biscuit when Clara walked into his office and told him she wanted the children nobody had taken. He blinked at her over his spectacles. "Mrs. Vale, you buried your husband yesterday." "Day before," Clara said. "That does not improve the matter. I have beds. You have a banknote. I have a roof. You have no income." Clara held his stare. "You pay board for county children." Danton leaned back. $3 a month per child, sometimes less when the county treasury is thin. That will not save your farm. "No," Clara said, "but it might save a child from being shipped off like a crate." The clerk looked at her for a long time. Then he opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a stack of papers tied with string. Too many papers, too many names. And for the first time, Clara understood the size of the thing the town had trained itself not to see. There were 8 children in Red Willow County, with no one left to claim them. The first wagon came on a Thursday. Amos was 13, narrow-shouldered, hard-eyed, and silent in the way boys become silent when every adult has failed them. His little sister, Nell, was 5. She held a cracked wooden horse in both hands and had not spoken in 7 months. Eli was 10, with a stammer that trapped half his words before they could leave his mouth. And Beatrice, who was 8, stepped down from the wagon, looked Clara up and down, and said, "I bite if people lie to me." Clara bent until their eyes were level. "I am too tired to lie." Beatrice frowned. "And if I am bad?" "Then you will be bad with supper in your stomach." "And if I am worse?" "Then breakfast, too." The child seemed almost disappointed. Then she picked up her bundle and walked into the house. That evening, Clara cooked beans for 5 children and herself in a kitchen that had known too much quiet. A chair scraped, a spoon dropped, someone whispered. Someone asked if the well had frogs in it. Someone else asked whether the red flags in the field meant they had to leave. Clara answered that question last. "No," she said. But in her own chest, the word shook. The other 4 came before September ended. Mara and June were twins of 6 who had not let go of each other's sleeves. Caleb was 11, and walked with a limp from a badly set brake nobody had paid to fix. And the last was a baby girl less than 2, found beside her dead mother after a washout on the South Road. The county papers called her unknown female child. Clara named her Mercy, because somebody should. 8 children, 1 widow, 128 acres, 5 weeks and 2 days to meet a note that might as well have been carved in stone. Red Willow Crossing did what small towns often do. It watched. It judged. It decided out loud. At the Mercantile, men said Clara had cracked from grief. At church, women lowered their voices and called her noble, which is what people say when they do not intend to help. Near the hitching rail, somebody laughed that she had found a clever way to make the county feed her. By the 2nd week of September, Bryce Holcomb rode back out. This time he did not bring surveyors. He brought disgust. Clara was in the yard with Amos and Caleb, trying to repair the north fence before the cattle found the weak place.
Eli hauled water in a bucket too heavy for him. The twins gathered kindling. Beatrice sat on the porch with the ledger, adding numbers with a stub of pencil and the grim satisfaction of a banker announcing ruin. Holcomb reined in and looked over the children. "So this is your defense," he said. Clara kept twisting wire. "My what?" "Orphans." The word landed in the yard like something dirty. "You think no bank wants the sight of children turned into the road?" Holcomb said. "You think 8 hungry faces can shame paper into forgetting what it is owed?" Clara stood then, slowly. There was mud on her skirt, and a wire cut across her palm. "Mr. Holcomb, I did not bring these children here to stand in front of your bank." She looked toward the porch, where Nell was half hidden behind a post, watching everything. "I brought them here because nobody else opened a door." "The result is the same." "No," Clara said. "It is not." Holcomb smiled without warmth. "Paper does not care what you call it." "No," she said, "but men do." For the first time, his expression changed, only a little, only enough for Clara to see the sentence had hit something under the polished coat. Then his face closed again. "The 15th of October," he said. "After that, the trust files claim." He rode away with the red flags flicking behind him in the field. Clara did not let the children see her lean against the fence until her knees steadied. Because the cruelest part was that Holcomb's arithmetic was not wrong. The county money bought flour, salt, lamp oil, and almost nothing else. 8 children ate like 8 children. Winter was coming. The note sat in town like a loaded gun that did not need a hand on it. So Clara sold Ezra's saddle, then his second coat, then the silver watch he had carried since their wedding, though she wrapped it twice before handing it over, because some part of her still thought objects could feel betrayal. Amos worked before dawn without being asked. Caleb could not run, but he could mend harness better than most grown men. Eli, whose words failed under pressure, could calm a nervous cow by standing near her and humming through his teeth. The twins could strip beans faster than Clara. Beatrice found 3 mistakes in Ezra's old accounts and announced that if men were allowed to borrow money, it was remarkable they were also allowed to count it. And Nell still did not speak. But every night she came closer to Clara's chair. First the doorway, then the stove, then the rug, then the little footstool beside Clara's knee. They were not a shield. They were not a scheme. They were a household, stitching itself together out of scraps everybody else had thrown away. And for brief moments, in the middle of the work and the fear, Clara felt something almost dangerous. Joy. Then the hail came. It struck on the 29th of September, just before dusk. No warning but a greenish sky and a silence the animals understood first. Then ice fell out of the clouds in white fists. It battered the garden flat, split the squash, shredded the bean vines, beat the last wheat heads into the mud. The children ran to pull what they could, but Clara dragged them back onto the porch because the hailstones were coming down hard enough to bruise bone. All they could do was watch the winter food disappear. That night, Clara sat at the kitchen table with the blue sugar tin open in front of her. $11.13. Less food than before. 16 days left. She had not cried at the funeral. She had not cried when she sold Ezra's saddle. She had not cried when Holcomb called the children a defense. But the sight of those coins in the lamplight broke her. She put her face in her hands. And that was when she heard small feet on the stairs. Nell stood in her nightdress, holding the cracked wooden horse. Clara wiped her cheeks quickly, but not quickly enough. The child crossed the kitchen, climbed into Clara's lap, put one hand on each side of Clara's face, and spoke for the first time since she had come. "Please don't send us back." The words were barely louder than breath. Clara held her so tightly, the wooden horse pressed between them. "I won't," she said. Nell trembled. "Even if we lose the farm?" Clara looked at the west room door, at the wet coats by the stove, at the ledger, at the field outside where red flags still marked land for someone else. Then she answered with the only truth she had left. "Even then." Her voice steadied. "A house is not made by boards, Nell. It is made by who is not sent away." Clara did not know that Bryce Holcomb was awake 3 miles away, sitting in the back room of the trust office with a lamp burning and his own hands shaking. He had ridden past the Vale place after the hail. He had meant only to inspect the damage. He saw Clara and Amos in the ruined garden, pulling broken squash from the mud. He saw Caleb carrying kindling with his bad leg dragging behind him. He saw Beatrice holding the baby under her coat. He saw little Nell standing barefoot on the porch, watching Clara, as if the whole world depended on one woman not breaking. And something old inside Bryce Holcomb opened against his will. Because before he had a ledger, before he had a coat, before he had a job that let him frighten widows politely, he had been a county child, too. Ohio, age 7. A poorhouse with iron beds, a winter room that smelled of lye, cabbage, and fear. A farmer who took him at 9 because boys were cheaper than hired men. Bryce had survived by believing one thing: no one comes, no one keeps you, no one owes you warmth. He had made that belief into armor. Then he had made the armor into a life. And now a widow with a banknote over her head had taken in 8 children because she could not bear a locked door. He hated her for it at first. Then he hated himself for needing to. On the morning of October 15th, the whole sky looked washed and pale. Clara put on Ezra's old coat because she had sold her own. She tied Mercy to her hip with a shawl. The children gathered without being told. Amos stood nearest the gate,
Caleb beside him, Eli behind the twins, Beatrice on the porch step, chin lifted like a judge. Nell held Clara's skirt with one hand and the wooden horse with the other. They heard Holcomb's horse before they saw him. He rode alone. No surveyors, no sheriff, no wagon for furniture, just a leather folder tucked under his arm. Clara steps down from the porch. "I have $11, she said before he could speak, and 13 cents. Holcomb dismounted. "That will not cover the note." "I know." "Nor the interest." "I know that too." He opened the folder and drew out a paper. The mortgage note. Clara recognized Ezra's signature at the bottom. For one strange second, the world seemed to narrow to that ink. Holcomb looked at the children, then at the red flags in the field, then at Clara. "I came to collect what was owed," he said. Beatrice muttered, "Then you came a long way for nothing." Nobody laughed. Holcomb folded the paper once, then again. Clara thought he was putting it away. Instead, he tore it in half, then into quarters, then smaller and smaller, until Ezra's debt was only white scraps in the morning wind. "The note is satisfied," Holcomb said. Clara could not move. "The release deed is filed in town, paid in full." She stared at him. "With whose money?" Holcomb swallowed. "Mine." No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to wait. He looked down at the torn paper in his hand. "I was one of them," he said. He did not need to explain. Not to Clara, not to the children, maybe not even to himself anymore. There was no door that stayed open for me. I decided that meant doors were foolish things. Then I built my life around closing them before they could close on me. His eyes moved to Nell. To see a child ask not to be sent away, and to know I had become the man who might do the sending. His voice broke there, only once. Then he finished. A man should pay when he finds out what he is. Clara looked at the field. The red flags snapped in the same wind that had carried Ezra's debt away. One by one, Amos pulled them from the wheat. Then Caleb. Then Eli. Then Beatrice marched out, yanked one hard from the earth, and held it up to Holcomb. "Are you still planning to be awful?" she asked. Holcomb blinked. Then, after a moment, he gave a tired laugh. "No," he said. "I expect I have retired from it." Beatrice considered him. "Good. We already have chores enough." That evening, Clara set one more plate at the table. Holcomb stayed for supper. He did not know how to sit in a noisy kitchen. He flinched when the twins laughed. He stared too long at the baby's hand gripping Clara's sleeve. But when Eli stammered so badly he could not ask for more beans, Holcomb passed the bowl without making him try again. That was the first useful thing he did in that house. It was not the last. By winter, Bryce Holcomb had left Platte Valley Trust. By spring, he was teaching Amos how to judge a heifer's weight by sight, and Caleb how to splint a gate so it would hold through thaw. He never became soft. Children do not need every grown person to be soft. Sometimes they need one to become dependable. And Bryce Holcomb, who had spent 50 years trusting nothing but paper, learned the slower work of being expected and showing up. The town changed its opinion because towns are very good at pretending their last opinion belonged to somebody else. The woman they had called foolish became Mrs. Vale, who had done a fine Christian thing. The children they had pitied became the Vale children, not county children, not foundlings, not trouble. Vale children. The winter was hard. The hail had taken too much. There were nights when supper was thin and mornings when the pump froze solid. But the house stayed warm. Not because there was plenty, because nobody ate alone. Nobody cried alone. Nobody slept wondering whether breakfast might come with a wagon ride away. Years passed. Amos bought the first additional milk cow with money he earned cutting hay. Caleb became the best wagon repairman between Red Willow and Kearney. Eli, who once could not speak under a raised voice, learned to sing cattle calm during storms. The twins married brothers, argued constantly, and still would not live more than 2 miles apart. Beatrice kept the farm accounts for 31 years and made every man who dealt with her regret rounding a number. Mercy grew up with no memory of being unnamed. And Nell, who had once asked not to be sent back, became the county teacher. On the first day of every term, she wrote one sentence at the top of the slate. A person is not a burden because someone else failed to carry them. Clara Vale lived to be 79. She never remarried. She never left the farm. And on winter evenings, when the stove glowed red and the wind pressed its shoulder against the walls, she would sometimes tell the story of the morning the red flags came out of Ezra's wheat. Not because a debt was torn, though it was. Not because a hard man changed, though he did. But because 8 children crossed a threshold that everyone else had closed. And one woman, with $11.13 to her name, decided that a home was not something you protected by keeping people out. It was something you proved by letting the right ones in. A deed can hold acreage. Only a promise can hold children.